I'm Elise, 31 years old. And for most of my life, I was just the helper. The background. The extra. The girl they told to smile for photos but never invited into the frame of their lives. They called me a nanny, a live-in housekeeper, and once, at a charity gala, the sweet girl who takes care of the kids. But I wasn't just anyone. I was family. They just didn't want to admit it. Before I continue, let me know where you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Drop your city in the comments, hit that subscribe button, and stick around, because this is how I went from invisible to untouchable, and how they never saw it coming. My mother was the youngest of 3 siblings. Her older sister, Marianne, married rich, the kind of rich with old money, foundation dinners, and country club memberships. Her husband, Edward Dunning, was the CEO of a legacy insurance firm. Big estate. Bigger ego. My mom, she was the opposite. She was a teacher. Gentle, smart, selfless. She taught kids with disabilities and spent more time giving away her time than saving any of it for herself. When I was 6, she got sick. By 8, I knew what the word terminal meant. By 9, I was an orphan. No father in the picture. No grandparents. Just one next of kin listed on the legal paperwork, my Aunt Marianne. They took me in. But took me in as a stretch. I didn't get a bedroom. I got a converted laundry room with a cot and a curtain for privacy. I didn't get school clothes. I got Briar's old uniforms, Briar being my cousin, 2 years older, and obsessed with designer everything. And I didn't get love. I got rules. Schedules. Be useful or be quiet energy. They told their friends I was a distant cousin, and when I asked why, Marianne said, because it sounds better than telling people we're raising charity. I learned fast not to ask for things. By 12, I was walking Briar and her little brother Seth home from school. By 14, I was helping with homework, folding laundry, and prepping breakfast before anyone else woke up. I was never called the nanny officially. But that's what I was. A live-in assistant with no salary, no rights, and no way out. Briar hated me. She said I had main character energy and she didn't like it. She said it with a smile, but it came with sabotage. She once switched my project for her failed science report, and I took the detention. She flirted with my first crush just to laugh when he dumped me for her. Seth was different. He was sweet. Shy. He'd sneak me extra cookies when Marianne wasn't looking. But even he never stood up for me. Edward barely spoke to me. He'd come home, nod in my direction, and ask where his slippers were. I wasn't even sure he knew I was family. I kept my head down. Got into a local college. Lived at home. Commuted. Worked part-time as a receptionist. And one day, the summer after I turned 21, everything changed. Edward had a heart attack. He didn't die. But it was serious. He went from unstoppable executive to a man struggling to button his own shirt. That's when Marianne snapped. She wasn't built to be a caretaker. So she handed the job to me. Elise, you'll help with his meds, meals, appointments, just like you do with the kids. You're good at that. No offer. No negotiation. Just orders. And I said yes. Because what else could I say? But this time, I paid attention. I started managing his calendar. His medication. His diet. His calls. Then his emails. Then, his files. I saw things. Documents. Accounts. Investment portfolios. A will. And something hit me. He didn't trust Marianne. Not really. I found an email chain between him and a law firm. Subject, contingency planning. Attached to it? A draft revision of his will. I wasn't mentioned. Yet. But Briar's name had been slashed. Redacted. replaced with hold pending behavioral concerns. That was the first time I realized he was watching me. I kept taking care of him. Polite. Quiet. Helpful. And 6 months later, he called me into his study. "Elise," he said, "you've proven yourself." Then he handed me a sealed envelope. He didn't say another word. When I got back to my room, still a converted laundry closet, I opened it. Inside was a key to a downtown bank lockbox, and a handwritten note. "What they've done to you is unforgivable. But what you've done despite it is unforgettable. If anything happens to me, use this key. And trust no one but yourself." I didn't sleep that night. The next day, when no one was home, I went to the bank. Inside the lockbox was paperwork. So much paperwork. Titles. Trust accounts. Portfolio overviews. And at the bottom, a fully notarized will. Not a draft. A real one. Edward had made me his sole personal heir. The house. The art. The estate accounts. The family stocks. All of it. Marianne would get a stipend. Briar and Seth a lump sum. But the legacy? The real legacy? Mine. It didn't feel real. I stood in that silent vault, clutching millions of dollars in ink and legal seals, still smelling like floor cleaner from the breakfast shift. But I knew then, the tide had turned. I said nothing. Went back to that house and made dinner like always. Sat in silence while Briar scrolled through her phone and Marianne whined about taxes. Pretended nothing had changed. Because they hadn't given me much in life. But they gave me one lesson for free. Power is quiet, until it doesn't have to be. I didn't tell a soul. Not Seth. Not even Edward. He hadn't said another word since handing me the envelope. I think he knew what it meant. I think he trusted I'd understand the weight of it, and wait. So I waited. 3 more months passed. Edward's health came and went like waves. Some days he was sharp enough to critique the Wall Street Journal. Other days he forgot where he was. He never mentioned the will again, and I never brought it up. Meanwhile, Marianne started acting like the queen of the manor again. She hosted luncheons with her plastic-faced friends, told the housekeepers how to iron his shirts, even though I was the one still doing all the laundry behind closed doors. Briar dropped in and out like a spoiled windstorm. One day she was at a wellness retreat in Malibu, the next she was home screaming about her missing skincare shipment and slamming doors like a teenager. But none of them noticed me anymore. Because they didn't think I mattered. And that made me dangerous. One night, Edward asked to speak with me privately. He looked smaller than I'd ever seen him, frail, but alert. The TV was playing softly in the background, some old movie he used to love. "You know," he said, "I used to think money was control. But control is an illusion. Loyalty, that's the real wealth." He turned to me with glassy eyes. "I'm sorry," he said. It was quiet. I nodded. I knew he meant more than just the past few years. He meant my whole life. Then he reached for my hand and said, "They won't understand. But I trust you to do what's right." 2 weeks later, he slipped into a coma. A stroke, sudden and unmerciful. There was no dramatic goodbye. No grand family moment. Just machines. Dials. Silence. He passed away on a Wednesday morning. Marianne cried like it was a stage audition. Briar posted a black and white photo of her and Edward from years ago, captioned, "He taught me everything. R.I.P. to a true king broken heart." Seth just stood there, hands in his pockets, saying nothing. The funeral was tasteful and soulless. Everyone wore black like a costume. I stood in the back, not even in the reserved pew for family. Even in death, they kept me behind the curtain. But not for long. A week later, the reading of the will took place at Kendrick and Bloom, Edward's longtime law firm. Their offices looked like an old library, all mahogany, brass fixtures and quiet judgment. I sat in the corner. Marianne wore a gray Chanel suit, tapping her nails on the conference table like she was bored already. Briar had sunglasses on indoors, like she thought paparazzi might crash the scene. Seth just looked tired. Mr. Kendrick walked in, greeted us formally, and pulled out a thick folder. "I'm here to execute the last will and testament of Edward Thorne Dunning, dated and notarized on July 14th of this year," he began. "All previous versions are considered null and void." Marianne perked up, expecting to hear about beach houses and art collections. Briar crossed her legs dramatically, ready for her reality show-worthy inheritance. But then Kendrick said my name. "Elise Hart," he began, "is to receive the entirety of Mr. Dunning's personal estate, including the Dunning residence, the private family trust, and full controlling shares of the Dunning Heritage Holdings portfolio." You could have heard a pin drop. Marianne's jaw tightened like a drawstring. Briar actually laughed. Wait. What is this? Some kind of prank?" Kendrick didn't blink. "Mrs. Dunning is to receive a monthly stipend of $2,500, adjusted for inflation annually. Briar Dunning and Seth Dunning are each to receive a lump sum disbursement of $50,000. All other assets have been assigned to Miss Hart." "No," Marianne snapped, standing up. "No, this is not right. She's not even family." I opened my mouth. "Yes," I said quietly. "I am." She turned on me, eyes wide. "You think cleaning his bedpans earned you a legacy?" I didn't reply. Because Kendrick wasn't done. "There's one final item," he said, pulling out a small device. A video message, recorded by Mr. Dunning the week before his stroke. He pressed play. Edward appeared on the screen, weak but clear. "If you're watching this," he said, "then I'm gone. And if you're upset, I expected you would be." He looked directly into the camera. "Elise Hart has served this family without complaint. Without entitlement. Without expectation. She has seen the worst in us and responded with patience, not pettiness. I'm not rewarding obedience. I'm honoring loyalty." He paused. "To Marianne, you built a world around status, but you forgot people aren't furniture. You erased a child because she didn't fit your vision. To Briar, I hope one day you find a version of yourself that doesn't need to destroy others to feel seen. And to Seth, I hope this gives you freedom." He looked away from the camera, then back again. "I trust Elise to do what's right with what I built. More than anyone else." Then the screen went black. Marianne stood frozen. Briar looked shell-shocked. "And Seth?" He smiled. "Just a little." I gathered my things and walked out of that room without another word. It was over. And it was only just beginning. I didn't go back to the house right away. I wanted them to sit with it first. To feel the reality settle into their polished bones. That I, the girl who used to scrub Briar's mascara stains off the bathroom counter, now held the keys to everything they considered theirs. By the end of the week, they were gone. I didn't even have to say a word. The lawyers handled it. Quietly, cleanly. I had the locks changed. The security codes wiped. The gardener rehired, because of course, they'd let him go to save costs, as if image could tend to itself. When I stepped through the front door that final time, alone and without permission, the silence felt different. It wasn't empty anymore. It was mine. The living room, where Marianne once threw a crystal vase because Seth knocked over a glass of wine, still smelled faintly of her overused perfume. I opened all the windows and let the air breathe for the first time in what felt like years. The walls were still covered in the family portraits. Briar in ballet costumes. Seth in little suits. Marianne in campaign-style photos from her local women's philanthropy board. None of me. Not one. So I printed one. A candid photo I'd taken with a timer on my phone, sitting in the back garden years ago, sunlight on my face, holding a book, peaceful, real. I blew it up. Framed it. Hung it at the top of the staircase. Now they'd have to look up to see me. I started the renovations almost immediately. The house had always felt cold. Marble, gray tones, intimidating angles. A place to impress, never to comfort. That changed. I painted walls in soft, honeyed tones. I installed floor-to-ceiling bookshelves where the useless display cabinets used to be. I turned the dusty east wing into a community study space for young women trying to escape circumstances like mine. And I renamed it. No longer the Dunning Estate. I called it Heart House, after my mother. A social worker once told me that legacy isn't just what you inherit, it's what you repair. And for the first time, I understood what that meant. We hosted our first girls' retreat 3 months later. 15 teenage girls, most of them quiet, guarded. They didn't trust rich homes. Neither did I. But this place wasn't about polished silver and secret shame anymore. It was soft. Open. Safe. One of the girls, her name was Danny, asked me, "So, were you rich growing up?" I laughed. Not even close. I used to wash the windows in this house. Now I live here. Her eyes lit up. No way. For real? I nodded. And for the first time, I saw what power looked like without pretense. It was hope. It wasn't long before the press came knocking. Some finance blog leaked a story, The Maid Who Inherited a Fortune. It went viral within 48 hours. Some people accused me of manipulating Edward. Others called me a symbol of quiet revenge. I stayed quiet. But when a women's platform reached out to publish my story in my own words, I said yes. I titled the essay "The Girl in the Laundry Room." I told the truth. I didn't embellish. I didn't victimize myself. I wrote about how a child raised on crumbs learns to make banquets out of silence. About how the people who are invisible to privilege often see the most clearly. And people responded. Thousands of messages. Women. Men. Teenagers. Older folks who had been erased by their families or told to stay small so others could shine. One comment stuck with me. You didn't take their power. You just stopped giving them yours. That line? I printed it out. It hangs in the entry hall. Seth visited about a month after the article came out. He brought me a plant. It's a lemon tree, he said. I read somewhere they represent healing. He looked around, slow and wide-eyed. It's different. It feels like you. I made us tea and we sat under the pergola I'd had built in the garden. The same garden where I once scraped gum off the concrete after Briar's Sweet 16. We talked for hours. And somewhere between the second cup and the sunset, he asked, "Do you hate me? For not doing more?" I looked at him. No, I said. I don't blame you for surviving. We were all trying to. He nodded, eyes low. I want to do better now. And I believed him. Briar, on the other hand, started posting cryptic stories on social media. Blood means nothing. Watch what happens when you give peasants power. And my favorite, it's not over. But no one cared. Her followers had seen the article. The video of Edward's will reading had leaked. People knew the truth. She looked petty. Transparent. Eventually, she moved to Miami and tried launching a wellness podcast. It lasted 3 episodes. Marianne? She filed a legal complaint, called me manipulative, unstable, dangerous. The court dismissed it in under 10 minutes. The stipend stopped 6 months later when she violated the clause about public defamation. She went silent after that. But I heard, through one of her friends who tried to network with me, that she now rents a 2-bedroom condo in a gated community and tells people her late husband was stolen from her by a con woman. Let her. Let them all spin their stories. Because I'm not here to argue anymore. I'm here to rebuild. Quietly. fiercely. And for the first time in my life, freely. Spring came early the next year. I'd always loved the quiet before sunrise, but in the Dunning house, now Hart House, it felt different. Sacred, almost. Like the walls themselves had exhaled all the poison that once lived inside them. Every corner now held intention. The dining room, where Marianne used to host her performative charity dinners, had been transformed into a scholarship planning center. I hired a small team of women, all survivors of family estrangement or domestic manipulation, to help me run applications and partnerships. We called it the Heart Initiative. Our goal? To find the invisible girls. The ones like I had been. Smart, capable, but silenced. To offer them not just money, but mentorship, housing, and safety. By the end of our first full year, we had funded 37 young women. I knew every one of their names. And they knew mine. I didn't just give them a check and wish them luck. I met with them. I listened. I told them how I grew up in a laundry room. How I wore hand-me-down uniforms and ironed the clothes of people who laughed behind my back. I told them the truth, that revenge isn't always about destroying someone. Sometimes, it's about refusing to become who they expected you to be. I never spoke publicly about Edward again. Not in interviews. Not in memoirs. Not on podcasts. But I kept a framed copy of that letter he gave me in my study. The one where he said, "What they've done to you is unforgivable. But what you've done despite it is unforgettable." He hadn't saved me. He had simply given me the tools to finish saving myself. And I did. A year to the day after the will reading, I hosted an event. Not a gala. Nothing flashy. Just an open house. For our girls, our donors, our volunteers. The guest list was intentionally small. And none of my former family were on it. But Seth showed up. He didn't RSVP. He just appeared, holding a small black notebook. "This was Edward's," he said, handing it to me. I found it in a box Mom never unpacked. It was his journal. He had written in it for years, about business, life, regrets. And me. Elise sees everything. I don't know how we all missed her, but she never missed us. Maybe she's the only one who never asked for anything because she knew exactly how much we owed her. My chest tightened. All those years I thought I was invisible, and yet I was imprinted in ink. I hugged Seth for the first time that day. He hugged me back like someone who finally understood what love should feel like, not loud, not performative, but consistent. Gentle. Safe. As the guests left that evening, one of the girls, Mariella, came to find me. She had been with us for nearly 6 months. Bright, ambitious, scarred by foster care and a childhood full of courtrooms. She looked up at the staircase. "Is that really you?" she asked, pointing to the photo I'd framed at the top, the one of me in the garden, sunlight pouring over my shoulder. I smiled. "Yeah. That's me." She hesitated. "You look like someone who was free." Even then. I blinked, surprised. Because when I took that photo, I'd felt like a prisoner. But maybe that was the moment something shifted, the moment I began imagining a life beyond those walls, even if I didn't know how I'd get there yet. "Maybe I was," I said quietly. "Maybe that's the day I started becoming who I really was." She nodded, like she understood. And then she asked something I never expected. "Do you think people like us are ever really allowed to win? Or do we just survive prettier?" The question hit like a stone. I looked around the room. The golden light. The voices of women laughing in the distance. The smell of bread from the kitchen. My own framed degree from a night school I paid for out of sheer spite and stubbornness. And I said, "We don't just win. We change the rules." Because I had. They raised me in a cage and forgot I had wings. They made me feel like an outsider in a home that was half mine by blood. They used my silence, my obedience, my grief, as tools to build their illusion. And I let them. Until I didn't. Until I stood up. Quietly. Strategically. Irrevocably. And now the heart name didn't just mean inheritance. It meant legacy. Real legacy. One built on healing, not hiding. And no one, not Marianne, not Briar, not even Edward, could take that from me. Not anymore. The second anniversary of Edward's passing came and went without a word from Marianne or Briar. I wasn't surprised. But I did receive a letter that week. Not an email. Not a phone call. A real, old-fashioned letter, cream-colored envelope, expensive stationery, a return address I didn't recognize. Inside was a short note, and signed. It still should have been us. Enjoy it while it lasts. There was no name, but I knew the handwriting. Briar had spent enough time perfecting the art of writing birthday cards like thank you notes to herself. Her loops were too tight. Her anger always showed in her capital letters. I burned the letter in the fireplace. Because I knew now what she hadn't yet learned: threats are powerless when you own everything they're trying to take. I no longer feared her. Or Marianne. Or the legacy they thought they could bury me under. Because I was above it now. I had built something from it. I stood in the hallway of Hart House that evening, barefoot, staring at the original family portrait still hanging at the base of the stairs. The one with Edward, Marianne, Briar, and Seth. Cold, posed, expensive. I had kept it up for a reason. To remind myself where I started. But I finally took it down that night. I replaced it with a new one. A collage of all the girls who had passed through our program. Smiling. Growing. Alive in a way I never was in those years. Each one had signed it with a message. You saw me when no one else did. You taught me how to breathe again. You made me feel like I could own my name. I read each one like a prayer. Then I climbed the stairs to the top landing where my portrait hung. The one of me in the garden. Alone, but not lonely. I touched the frame gently and whispered, "We made it." Because we had. I hadn't gotten revenge in the traditional sense. I hadn't screamed. I hadn't exposed anyone. I hadn't burned their world to the ground. But I'd done something far more terrifying. I'd outlived their control. I'd inherited the empire they thought I was too weak to even understand, and transformed it into something they couldn't recognize. And now? Now I was ready for the next chapter. Hart House was thriving. The scholarship fund had doubled. Donations rolled in weekly. And more importantly, I was planning something bigger. A second property. In my mother's hometown. I'd visited it once as a child, a small town with dirt roads and tight arms, where she said people still waved from their porches and knew the names of the mailmen. I bought a small, aging boarding school there. The roof leaked. The walls creaked. But I walked through it with a notepad and a dream. It would be a sanctuary for girls aging out of foster care. A place to live, study, heal. Not temporary, permanent. Foundations, not stepping stones. I named it Caroline's Place, after my mom. I stood in the overgrown courtyard one afternoon, my hands dusty, hair pulled back, vision full. And I saw her. Not literally, but something like it. A breeze moved through the trees. Soft. Familiar. And I remembered her voice from years ago. Just because you're small now doesn't mean you won't grow into something powerful. She always said that when I cried about being ignored. About being pushed aside. I smiled, eyes wet, staring at the brick walls soon to be painted, the windows soon to be replaced. Everything she never got to see me become, I was finally becoming. It took me decades to get here. But now I stood with the keys in my hand. The pen in my grasp. The ending mine to write. And I would write it well. A few months after I closed on Caroline's Place, I received an unexpected phone call. "Hello? Elise Hart?" the woman asked. "Yes," I replied, cautious. "This is Dr. Lena Travers. I was your mother's oncologist." I don't know if you remember me. I did. Her voice had lived in the corners of my nightmares as a child, soft and apologetic and full of hard truths about tumors and timelines. I'm retired now, she continued, but I read about Hart House. And then Caroline's Place. And I wanted you to know how proud she would be. Your mother talked about you every day. Every single day. I froze. The woman I had barely gotten to grow up with. I had no recordings of her voice. No video footage. But here was someone who had known her when I was too young to ask the right questions. She said you were stronger than she ever was, Dr. Travers added. She told me, my daughter won't let them shape her into something small. She's going to make the world pay attention to the quiet ones. I thanked her through tears I hadn't felt coming. After we hung up, I sat alone in my new office at Caroline's Place, clutching a photo of my mother, one of the only ones I had. She was smiling, holding me on her hip, her eyes tired but so full of love. That was when I understood something important. This wasn't just revenge anymore. This was resurrection. Of stories that had been buried. Of names that had been silenced. Of dignity stolen in whispered moments and rewritten histories. I wasn't just reclaiming my own life. I was reviving hers. That weekend, I returned to the cemetery for the first time in over 10 years. Her grave was simple. Weather-worn. Neglected. It read, Caroline Hart. Beloved teacher, mother, sister. 1964 to 2003. I brought fresh lilies. Her favorite. I sat beside her for over an hour, telling her everything. About Edward. About the house. About Marianne's breakdown and Briar's Miami podcast failure. About Seth's quiet redemption and my slow, blooming peace. And then I whispered, they called me the Maid. The charity case. The help. But now they say my name with weight. I made sure of it. A wind blew through the trees. I took it as a yes. From that day on, I visited her every month. No longer out of grief, but gratitude. Because every step I took was paved by the woman who taught me that love isn't loud, it's lasting. One of the most surreal moments came later that year when I received an invitation to speak at a university. Not just any university. The one Briar had barely graduated from. Apparently, they'd read my piece, The Girl in the Laundry Room, and were starting a series on invisible power, voices that changed the system. I stood at the podium in front of hundreds of students, professors, journalists. I wore a tailored suit, nothing flashy, but something that made me feel like steel wrapped in silk. I told them the truth. All of it. About growing up erased in a house that claimed to take me in. About learning that obedience doesn't buy safety, and silence doesn't buy respect. About how sometimes, the biggest act of vengeance is outgrowing the people who swore you'd never matter. I ended the speech with the same words I tell every girl who walks through the doors of Hart House. You are not hard to love. You are hard to control. And those two things are not the same. When I stepped off the stage, the applause felt like thunder. Not for who I used to be, but for who I'd decided to become. And when I got home that night, to my own house, to my own bed, to my own name written in full on the mailbox, I didn't feel like a survivor anymore. I felt like a builder. Of legacy. Of safety. Of futures. Of my mother's hope. And of the revenge I never had to shout to make heard. It was early autumn when the Board of Trustees for the local historical society reached out to me. They wanted to formally recognize Hart House as a cultural landmark, not for its architecture, but for its transformation. They called it a symbol of reclaimed power. I didn't need the recognition. But I accepted the plaque they gave me, not for myself, for every girl who walked past it and saw a reflection of what she could become. The ceremony was simple. Poised. A journalist asked me, if you could say anything to the family who raised you now, what would it be? I thought about it for a long moment. And then I said, thank you. She blinked. You thank them? Yes, I said. Because they showed me exactly what I never wanted to become. And in doing so, they handed me the blueprint for something better. I walked away before she could ask the follow-up. There was nothing else to explain. Some wounds don't need to be reopened to prove they bled. Instead, I focused on what was next. Caroline's place was already at capacity. We had girls waitlisted, girls with stories that haunted my dreams and fueled my determination. So I bought a third property. An abandoned motel on the edge of the city, with a flickering neon sign and years of ghost stories in the walls. I renamed it the Turning Point. It would be transitional housing for women leaving abusive relationships. A place with locks they could trust. With rooms that smelled like safety, not bleach. People warned me I was doing too much. But I wasn't doing nearly enough. Because I remembered what it felt like to be 16 and terrified, with no door to lock behind me and no adult who would fight for me. Now I was the adult. And I was building doors for every girl who had been taught to knock quietly and apologize for asking. One night, while checking the renovation plans for the Turning Point, I got a message on social media. It was from Briar. Just 2 words. You won. No punctuation. No apology. No acknowledgement of what she'd done. But it was something. And I didn't respond. Because there's a difference between forgiveness and access. I had nothing left to prove to her. Or to Marianne. Or to the world that once asked me to shrink so others could shine. I didn't need their applause. I had my peace. Later that week, I hosted a dinner at Hart House. 12 girls sat around the table. Some were laughing too hard. Some ate like they hadn't felt full in months. One cried when she tasted the dessert because it reminded her of the grandmother who used to tuck her in. I sat at the head of the table, watching them. Not as their savior. As proof that healing is contagious. That when one woman rises, she leaves a trail for others to follow. And in that moment, I realized something. The greatest revenge isn't just living well. It's living free, and opening the door behind you. So others can walk through it, too. Winter came soft and slow that year. For the first time in my adult life, I didn't dread the holidays. There were no brittle silences over dry turkey. No forced smiles, no matching outfits for family photos where I stood awkwardly in the corner holding someone else's child. Instead, the girls from Hart House decorated the banisters with handmade garlands and danced to music in the kitchen. We held a potluck Christmas Eve dinner. Some had nowhere else to go. Some didn't want to go back. None of them were alone. I made my mother's sweet bread, the recipe she used to hum through, barefoot and tired after long teaching days. The scent wrapped around the house like a blanket. One of the girls, Talia, asked, "Did you ever think you'd get here?" I paused, slicing the warm loaf. "Every day I didn't," I said. "Until the day I did." She nodded like she understood. And I think she did. Because everyone in that house had survived something unspeakable. Family betrayal. Abuse. Abandonment. Systems that chewed them up and spat them out. And yet, they were all still here. Building. Laughing. Reclaiming their joy, one room at a time. On New Year's Eve, I stood out in the garden as fireworks echoed in the distance. Seth joined me quietly. He lived nearby now, working with a nonprofit that helped kids navigate mental health services. He came by often. Never asked for anything. Just helped. He handed me a cup of cider and said, "Mom's selling her jewelry. I think she's struggling more than she lets on." I looked at him. "Do you want me to help her?" He hesitated, then shook his head. "No. She wouldn't accept it. And you don't owe her that." It was true. But I knew that if one day Marianne came to my door, not with venom or pride, but with the humility of someone who had truly changed, I would open it. Not for her. But for me. Because forgiveness, when given freely, is just another form of freedom. Seth exhaled slowly. I'm proud of you, you know. I smiled. Thanks. I'm proud of you too. We stood in silence for a moment as the stars blinked above the frozen trees. Then I turned to him. I'm thinking of writing a book. He grinned. It's about time. I didn't want to write a revenge story. Not really. I wanted to write a survival story that bloomed into something bigger. One that showed girls like me, like us, that being underestimated can be your greatest disguise. That quiet is not weakness. That dignity isn't earned through bloodlines or inheritance, but through how you choose to rise after being buried. The next morning, I sat down in the study, the same one where Edward once read his newspaper and ignored my presence, and opened my laptop. I typed. My name is Elise Hart. I was raised to serve the very people I now outrank. They told me I was invisible. But I didn't need to be seen by them. I just needed to see myself. And now, I help others do the same. It poured out of me. Every word a blade. Every memory a stepping stone. I wrote until my fingers hurt and my coffee went cold. And when I finished the first chapter, I leaned back and looked around. No more cold marble. No more footsteps behind me. Just warmth. Safety. Power I'd created on my own terms. I began the new year with a kind of energy I hadn't felt since I was a little girl. Not adrenaline, not excitement, clarity. Every step I took now felt chosen. I didn't flinch when decisions had to be made, didn't hesitate when my voice needed to be heard. I was no longer the girl in the laundry room. I was the woman building entire wings of safety for people like her. Caroline's place had reached capacity again, with girls still on a growing wait list. Donations were up. We had partnerships now, with local hospitals, therapists, community colleges. We even secured a state grant after a senator's daughter quietly applied and was accepted into the program. No one ever forgets who protected their child. The turning point opened quietly but filled immediately. A converted 1960s roadside motel, now with warm lighting, new beds, and locks. Every woman had the key to herself. Some residents stayed only a week, others, months. One woman, Mia, left a note under my office door after checking out. No one's ever looked at me like I could be more than what I survived. You did. I'm starting over because of you. I kept that note in my wallet. It reminded me that even when no one claps, the work is still holy. I spent more time writing, too. Not just the book, but letters. To my mother. To girls who had graduated the program. To donors. To former teachers who had once quietly passed me a snack or slipped me an extra pencil when I clearly didn't have one. Each letter was a piece of the legacy I was stitching back together. And then one afternoon, while sorting through old boxes we'd retrieved from storage, I found something that made me sit down on the hardwood floor and cry. A cassette tape. It had my name on it. For Elise, from Caroline. I stared at it, frozen. I didn't even know she'd made anything like this. I ran to the tech assistant we'd hired for the scholarship program and begged her to help me find a player. Within an hour, we had one rigged up in a converted office. I pressed play. Static first. Then her voice. My mother's voice. Hi, baby, she said. If you're hearing this, I guess you're older now. Maybe not grown, but older than I ever got to see you be. And I just want to say, I love you. Every part of you. She paused. I know it won't be easy. I know where you're going, and I know who you'll be around. And I'm sorry for that. But I want you to know, you are more than what they make you feel. You are brilliant. You are kind. And no matter how quiet they try to make you, your voice matters. I sat there with my hand over my mouth, shaking. I hope you find love. I hope you build your own world. And when they try to tell you that you don't belong at the table, you look them in the eyes and say, then I'll build my own damn table. She laughed a little. I love you, Elise. You are not small. You are just waiting to grow into the space you were always meant to take up. The tape ended. I cried until my stomach hurt. Then I played it again. I must have listened to that tape 100 times that month. I kept it beside my bed. I played it on hard days. On days when the walls whispered old insecurities or when a girl told me she didn't believe in herself. I'd let her hear my mother. Because my mom's voice was the first thing that ever told me I was enough. And now, it could do the same for them. That spring, I was asked to speak at a national conference on trauma recovery and women's leadership. Thousands of people. Industry leaders. Legislators. Survivors. I stood on stage in front of the largest crowd I'd ever seen. I opened with a story. Not about revenge. About a girl kneeling on a cold tile floor, cleaning scuff marks off shoes that didn't belong to her. I used to think my story was a tragedy, I said. Now I know it was a blueprint. I told them about Marianne. About Edward. About how silence can be a survival tactic, but it shouldn't become a lifestyle. I told them how I'd turned whispers into war cries. And then I ended with this. You don't have to scream to shatter a dynasty. You just have to stop obeying it. The audience stood. Not just clapping, crying. Cheering. Holding each other. And somewhere deep in the lights, I imagined my mother watching. Smiling. The next day, I got a call from a publisher. They wanted my book. National distribution. Full backing. They were offering a substantial advance, but more than that, they offered freedom. I wouldn't have to censor a thing. I said yes. The title came easily. The Quiet One, A Legacy Rewritten. It hit shelves in the fall and sold out within days. Not because it was scandalous. Because it was honest. The girls at Hart House read it together, one chapter per night in the living room. They took turns reading aloud. Sometimes they cried. Sometimes they laughed. Sometimes they asked me, did this really happen? Yes. Every word. And the truth is, I wouldn't change a second of it. Because everything they took from me, I took back. Quietly. Fiercely. Permanently. The first time I saw my book in a bookstore window, I stood still for nearly 5 minutes. It was surreal. My name, my full name, printed on the cover, surrounded by other authors I had admired, studied, even envied once. Now I was one of them. Not because someone handed me a shortcut, but because I built the road brick by aching brick. Inside the store, a woman approached me. She looked to be in her 60s, silver hair swept up neatly, soft eyes behind large reading glasses. Excuse me, she said, holding the book to her chest. Are you Elise Hart? I nodded, cautiously. She looked like someone who might have known Edward or attended one of Marianne's luncheons. But instead, her eyes filled with tears. My daughter is 17, she said. She found your story online and told me she finally understood why she always felt out of place. She's been carrying pain I didn't even know how to reach. But your words helped her put it down. I didn't know what to say. So I just hugged her. Not out of politeness. Out of understanding. Because sometimes the most revolutionary thing we can do is tell the truth, even if our voice trembles. That weekend, Caroline's Place celebrated its 3rd anniversary. The girls planned a surprise for me. When I walked into the courtyard, dozens of strings of fairy lights flickered from the trees. A handmade banner read, "To the one who made us feel seen." There was music, food, laughter. I didn't even try to hold back tears. And then Mariella, the same girl who once asked if we were ever allowed to win, handed me a wrapped box. Inside was a necklace. A simple gold pendant. Engraved on it were 3 words. You changed everything. I held it in my hands, unable to speak. Because I hadn't done it alone. I had been carried, too, by my mother's voice, by Edward's final decision, by Seth's quiet support, and most of all, by the girls who trusted me enough to share their stories. That night, I stood out under the stars and whispered a thank you into the sky. For everything. For the pain that taught me. For the silence that shaped me. For the betrayal that birthed me into something stronger. And for the revenge I never had to shout. The next morning, I began the process of opening a foundation. The Heart Legacy Fund, designed to support the work long after I was gone. Scholarships, housing, therapy, education. I made sure it would run independently, immune to the kind of manipulation that once choked the air from my childhood. I even included a clause. No family member by blood could serve on its board unless they had completed 2 full years of service in a program like ours. No shortcuts. No nepotism. Only earned trust. Seth joined the board immediately. He didn't flinch at the clause. I wouldn't want it any other way, he said. That summer, we hosted our largest retreat yet. Nearly 50 girls. From across the country. Different backgrounds, different scars. But the same unshakable hope in their eyes. We stood in a circle on the final day, each one sharing what they were taking home. When it was my turn, I looked at them, this new generation of fire and softness and truth, and I said, I was raised in a house where silence was currency. Where power meant cruelty. Where love came with conditions. But here, I get to rewrite that. And so do you. They clapped. Some cried. And I knew, as surely as I'd ever known anything, that I was exactly where I was meant to be. Not in Edward's shadow. Not at Marianne's mercy. Not under Briar's scrutiny. But in my own story. Finally written by me. And if you've made it this far, if this story felt like it echoed something inside you, I want you to know, you're not alone. There's a reason it found you. There's a reason you kept listening. Maybe your voice has been buried too. Maybe someone tried to rewrite your ending before you ever got the chance to hold the pen. But you're here now. So please, like and subscribe to the Revenge Secrets if this journey resonated with you. Comment below where you're watching from. Tell your story. It matters more than you think. And always remember, you don't need to scream to be heard. You just need to stop whispering your worth.